You look so nice.
Thank you. Yeah, just filming all day.
Really? Were you? You got that whole thing? You look
Oh
nice.
yeah, but believe me, I was filming a full body shot, so I needed the whole get up.
Okay, listen, we went live. Do you see that? We went live?
Oh, are we live?
We are live. So now everybody knows that that you're wearing the get up and why you're wearing it. So I want to thank you so much. We did this kind of spur of the moment, and I think it's really cool. We got a question. I got to turn down my music. You like my music, right?
I love your music, but I don't know if everybody does.
Everybody loves my
I do
music.
though.
I was going to ask you in advance if you wanted me to put on some gospel because I like music that's an appreciation of things that are above and beyond us, right? But I didn't get a chance to do that. So I want to thank you because we did this really at the last minute, and this was kind of inspired. And let me show everybody the question. This was inspired because Election Wizard, who's awesome. Do you follow Election Wizard? Have you ever been
I
to the
do.
election?
I do.
election?
Yeah, they're good.
They really are. And I get all of their. I follow them on Telegram, and Telegram is really cool because you can follow them. I follow them on Twitter also, of course, but you can follow them on Telegram, and then you get the links that bring. You get their key kind of like capsules, and then you get the link, and it brings you to their website.
They're very, very powerful, very effective in terms of what they do, very efficient in their use of information. And they've taken their approach to social media has been incredibly successful. And you're seeing so many other accounts now starting to copy what they do. And that's sort of one of those things where imitation is the highest form of flattery. And so, that quick tweet that is able to distill enough of the information that you get it, but then if you want to learn more, you can, and then boom, they give you the opportunity to click on that link right there. I think the next step, if they haven't done it yet, or no, correct me if I'm wrong, Election Wizard does do this, where they'll actually have their own website set up so they can monetize it and then link back to even deeper information if you want that.
Yeah, they've got electionwiz.com. So
they do.
I go to electionwiz.com very frequently because, I'm very cautious with Twitter, and I've expressed this to everybody. And I'm very, Twitter is curating reality. That's what a person's timeline is, right? It's curating reality. So I'm very cautious of what I let into my mind because I know that once it's in my mind, if it's not good quality, it's very difficult to take out, right? It's easy to put in
Marcus Aurelius once said that your soul is made up of the quality of your thoughts.
Oh, that's awesome. I got to think about that. So Election Wiz does have a website, and their website is Election Wiz. And I'm very happy because I was kind of a small part of them setting up that website because we would speak via DM, and I gave them my thoughts as a person who goes there frequently. So Election Wiz asked a really interesting question. So then I texted you and I said, it's a good question, right? This was their question. It was Election Wizard _ predicts, said, thought experiment. Suppose you have a close friend who's well-meaning but supports Antifa. You're worried about destroying a friendship. How would you persuade your friend to abandon their support of Antifa? What would you say to them?
Well, so my response to this is when it comes to your friend, I'd ask your friend what their values are and for them to check their values and ask then if Antifa's actions and the results of Antifa's actions, the consequences of that, those violence, the crackdowns, the fighting, the division have been to serve those values or have been in rejection of them. And quite directly, I would really even add, I'd say, if you're someone who's in Antifa or you're someone who's considering joining Antifa, I thought you guys were the populists. I thought you guys were the anarchists, right? So anarchism, that comes from Greek, anarchos. Anarchos means no ruler, and without ruler. So without any ruler, but yet Antifa seeks to impose their authority over individuals, over social structures, and over institutions that they disagree with. So through their imposition of their own authority, through violence, through direct action, through protest, through mass humiliation, a variety of tactics that they use, doxing, cancel culture, that is an imposition of rule. It's an imposition of authority. That is not in line with true anarchos, true anarchy, if you understand your own philosophy, right? So you seek the moral usurpation of the state, because an anarchist believes that the state has no moral authority. Well, if you believe the state has no moral authority, though, what gives you the right to impose your own authority over others? So I'd ask them to go and read some more about anarchist philosophy to understand where this comes from, understand the imposition of authority over others and how violence can be a part of that. Because even though you may believe that you're simply fighting for liberation and fighting for a true insurrection of the status quo, look at the people that are directly impacted by this. Inner city business owners, inner city residents, the residents of Chaz, the business owners of Chaz, the Capitol Hill area who became victims of that area, the kids that were killed there, the people that lost their businesses, that lost everything in these fires and these riots last year. And I'd ask, is that the quality of a true anarchist? Is that true essence of anarchos?
And you've been very helpful because you've actually addressed a couple of different issues. So I want to break them down a little bit because there's a lot there, right? And in order to have that conversation with a friend requires 5 minutes of that inquiry, right? It's a dialectical discourse, and they've got to be willing to engage in that, right? And that's kind of an exhausting type of thing. So I want to break that down a little bit. And you and I discussed this right before, and I really want to get everybody.
Well, really, and if that's enough of a tidbit for you to start that conversation, and then there's also a path for you to say, well, you know what? I also just picked up this book. It's called The Antifa. It's stories from inside the Black Bloc. It's not a polemic where it's saying, arguing for Trump or Trumpism. It's explaining what Antifa is, what it purports to be, and how it falls short of that goal time and time again. It's actually a dissertation on the philosophy of Antifa, the philosophy of anarcho-communism, anarcho-socialism, and how it has always, from the start, when it was founded in the 1920s as the Red Front Fighting Brigades of Leon Trotsky, gone all the way through to today, it has always ended up serving the needs of the elite, serving the needs of the vanguard, serving the needs of one bourgeoisie or another, and the needs of the proletariat always end up forgotten. And the proletariat, the small guy, the Lao Bai Shing, whatever you want to call them, they always end up the victims whenever this is instituted or whenever it's attempted. And it's been going on now for nearly, 2021, nearly 100 years.
When you think of Antifa and you're trying to kind of collapse it and condense it into just a something that your mind can kind of like break into its kind of a particle, right? The most subatomic particle you can come up with, or whatever the smallest type of thing is, right? How do you define Antifa to yourself? When you take away all the visuals, all the burning down stuff, which are kind of the properties of Antifa, right? How do you define Antifa to yourself? And then when you're trying to explain it, and you just wrote this book, you wrote it, The Antifa, I've got it behind me, right? When you're trying to explain it very briefly to somebody, what the book is, how do you explain it to yourself when you've got to explain to yourself what it is? And how do you explain to somebody else what Antifa
That's great you mentioned that, because a lot of the book was written, some chapters were written from my notes, my own personal notes from as far back as 5 years ago. I go all the way back to 2016 for a lot of this, 2017, the attack on the 45th president's inauguration in Washington, D.C. And then other parts of it I wrote while I was on the road throughout 2020, covering not only the election, but the riots, many of which I was covering from the ground. So just last week, or I guess 2 weeks ago now, I went back and actually reread the entire thing, went through line by line, just to even refresh myself on what Antifa is and what all of it is, and to give it a fresh front of mind perspective on myself and for myself. And the way I think of it, in short, Antifa is a code word for a communist Red Front group that seeks an insurgency through the United States, North America, and Western Europe that is looking for the usurpation of the status quo, the overthrow of the current system as they define it, and seeks eventually the destabilization of these sovereign republics for the eventual overthrow of them by communism. And I say that as somebody who comes from Polish stock, Obviously, communism is something that we, in that sense, are very familiar with. And my own wife is actually born in the Soviet Union and has told me story after story of the repression and the totalitarianism from back home. And so when I look at those stories from my own family, when I look at the stories of the history of communism throughout, we go into the origin story of communism in China. We talk about the Weimar Republic. We get into the Bolshevik Revolution. And we see time and again these same tactics employed and the same outcomes resulted in.
So how would you advise me or Nancy, right? He's right here with in discussion with our friends when I when I understand that they're sympathetic to Antifa, and a good part of their sympathy is really just tied to its very effective branding and marketing because it's anti-fascist. How can you be against Antifa because then you're pro-fascist? So how do you kind of break that mythology?
Right. So if you're talking to someone who's lost in the mythology of what I call the logical fallacy of word thinking and saying, well, if someone's anti-Antifa, that means they're just anti-fascist. I would say if you can't get past the fact that Antifa is simply a code word for Communist Front Group, Communist Red Front Group, then you need to start looking at the actual optics, the visuals. They are dressed in black. They are wearing black goggles. Look at the very cover of the book. Black goggles, black hoods, black masks, marching together in a black block. Do these really seem like the good guys?
And what would be your response? See, I'm inquiring. I didn't prepare you for any of this, right? Well, but you're such an. I've got to tell you something. The response that I'm sure you got as well to the discussion that we had last week was awesome. That was an awesome chat. You are
That was
so
good. That
well,
was really good. I do
so,
appreciate that.
You're so well informed on this. You're so academic, and you're very good at taking out that political element of it because it's so easy to say they're a Hillary mafia or something, right?
Right, and that's just not correct. That's not factually correct. It's not something that's been borne out in my research or my own personal experiences with Antifa, with this phenomenon. They are not a group that shares any direct linkages to Hillary or Biden or Kamala Harris or any of these various establishment mainstream Democrat groups. And in fact, they oppose them. It's just that they oppose Republicans and conservatives and finance and the church and religious and various institutions more. But that is not to say that this is a group that supports the Democrat Party writ large. There may be some politicians at the local levels or more regional levels that they would support, but certainly as in terms of the party itself, Antifa does not support the Democrats. They do not support the Republicans. They support, and what they want is an overthrow of the entire system through violence.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I want to get to a couple of comments here because I'm also interested in other people's, and we're timing this. Did you know we're timing this? Remember, I told you 20 minutes.
You promised. You promised.
I did. It's important. And I'm going to tell you why it's important. We discussed your book a little bit before this and why I think it's important for you to discuss your book. I want to discuss a difficulty that I've encountered with other people. Okay. And that is that, well, your book is right here. Okay. So I'll take your book. I have host right underneath someplace, but we'll use your book, right? When I want to have a discussion about Antifa with people, I have the handicap that I've got to deprogram them of everything they've heard for the last 4 years in the media about this kind of Homeric odyssey of what Antifa is. And in order for me to have that discourse with them, right, that kind of Socratic type of give and take requires a lot of effort on my side, and it requires a lot of effort on their side, right? They've got to have an agreement to have this discussion with me. And it's always going to lead to some type of an apparetic type of outcome because I'm never going to be able to persuade them. And we're always going to just be kind of battling with linguistic trickery. So one of the difficulties I've had as a liberal who is neither aligned to the left or to the right, right? I'm an old-fashioned liberal. I'm a New York liberal. Is I have a handicap that everybody has, which is how do we explain to people what Antifa is on their time? In other words, I can't say that Antifa is a terrorist organization or this or that, because that requires time on their side. They might not have 20 minutes for me to have that conversation.
The word I think you're looking for is illiberal. Antifa is an illiberal organization that seeks to achieve their outcomes through illiberal methods and illiberal tactics. And to use that phraseology of illiberal, you're then presenting it from a position of going against the grain of your own personal information. That's why at the beginning, when I said Antifa does not live up to the values of philosophical anarchism, right? I'm now meeting you on your own terms. I'm understanding your terms. I've taken the time to understand your concerns, your priors, and your values, and know your value system, hopefully as well as you do. And if not, you can inform me of that, or I'll pick up on it throughout the course of the conversation. But when you meet someone on their own terms, you talk to them on your own terms. Like I wouldn't talk to a conservative about Antifa that way, right? But if I'm talking to a liberal who's open-minded enough to at least have that discussion and be willing to learn about that, I would say, look, I understand that to you, openness and thoughtfulness and transparency are very important. Innovation and progress are things that are very important to liberals. This is a group that doesn't stand for progress. This is a group that does not stand for openness, and they certainly do not believe in tolerance. They are an illiberal group that's actually fighting against everything that, believe it or not, everything that you believe in as well.
You know what I would say? I just had this conversation today. Nancy, I bumped into one of our old neighbors, that couple that moved to Jackson Heights, that wonderful couple. So, nice. Yeah. I was surprised to see him. And we were actually talking about where he lived. There was riots, and they did a lot of damage. And he was very aware of the infiltration. He was very anti-Trump. He made that very clear. But he was also very aware that there's and he's Hispanic, by the way, that there's a lot of inauthenticity to the underlying issues, right? Not saying that they're not real issues, but that there's a kind of a veneer of a real issue, and then underneath it, there's a lot of other issues. And we kind of stopped at the Antifa front. So I'll tell you what I would say. So Election Wiz's comment came in a really good time, because you know what I would say? Different than what you would say.
Lay it on me.
I would actually say, if I give you a book, will you read it? Doesn't that sound solicitous of me? Doesn't that sound solicitous? It's not, because you know what? When I'm giving a person a book, they can now read it at their own leisure. They can allocate as much of their own emotional and intellectual bandwidth as they feel is appropriate for that moment. Do you follow me? If I'm on a beach and I'm reading a book, is a lot different than if I'm on a beach and you're shouting in my ear about Antifa burning down.
Yes, certainly. Right? So, and if I'm sitting in a restaurant and waiting for Nancy, but she's never late. She's always waiting for me. So if Nancy's sitting in a restaurant, she's waiting for me. She wants to read a book, right? That's what everybody does. So she will open up the book. The proverbial sitting on a train, sitting on the subway.
Okay, but that is very important, because that's kind of like time shifting. The way people used to use DVRs or TVRs, whatever they are, for time shifting, like TiVo, where there would be a sports program or there would be a live program, but they would want to watch it later. You know what I mean?
We don't even call it that anymore. I guess the phrase was on demand, right? So this is information on demand. Now it's all streaming, right? So streaming is inherently on demand. It is, I demand this show at this time. You might be watching Jack and Adam live, or you might be watching this a day after, 3 days after, 4 days after, whatever the shelf life may be. But you might say, you know what, that Jack and Adam thing looked interesting. I'm going to check it out in a little while. I'm in the middle of something right now. That's something that's fantastic and able to do with the book. Now, we haven't actually recorded the audiobook yet, because just from a rollout strategy, we're actually putting a pause before we do the audiobook, because that gives us the opportunity to do kind of a second launch, a second rollout for it. So on antifabook.com, you can go. By the way, one thing that's new now from the last time you and I spoke is that you can go to the website now, antifabook.com, and through Calamo, we are, as the publisher, we're allowing people to do autographed copies and personalized copies. So we're making that available directly for people. So if they're looking for my autograph, or even a personalized autograph from me, or a message to some family member, if you have a birthday or Father's Day is coming up, we are now making that available. We've been able to talk to our distributors and work out all the crazy COVID logistics of the whole thing. But it is made up in such a way. And it's obviously definitely something where if you want to give this to somebody and say, hey, look, this is for you, got to sign it.
You've got to.
I thought of you. I know you're interested in this stuff. I don't know if you agree with this group or disagree with this group, but here's a whole book about it.
You got you. I'm going to interrupt.
See what you think.
You ready for this? I'm going to interrupt because I'm going to keep you to the time limit. We're a little bit over, but you're a little bit late. So I'm going to keep you to it. Let me explain again. The difficulty a normie, I'm a normie, right, is nobody trusts the news. Everybody knows that there's something called Antifa. Everybody knows that there's insurgents. Everybody knows that these people are prone to violence. But the media sells them as the media has become their recruiting agency, right?
Right.
They've sold them as there's some type of a virtuousness to it, and there's some type of a harmoniousness that people.
But Jake Tapper compared them to the Avengers.
Did he really?
He did.
Wow. So if I wanted to inform somebody about Antifa, I would not have an extended conversation with them because it's not fair to them. It's not fair to me because it could jeopardize our friendship. So right here we've got Louis, okay, and I know that Louis.
Oh yeah, hey, what's up, Louis?
Yeah, and Louis has been very open with his own background, right? So a lot of us know a bit about Louis' background in terms of his ethnicity and where he lives and several other elements, and
the fact that he's a fire sci-fi writer.
Yeah, but so a lot of people who are watching this already know what Antifa is. I'm very interested in the people who don't know what Antifa is. And the only way that conservatives and whatever people want to call me, right? I don't know. But the only way we can fight this battle is if we can discuss what Antifa is and give it definition and define its terms. It's like the only way that you cannot have another Hitler. So I hate saying that, but another Hitler is to continually be reminding people of the history of Hitler and the history of what that was.
What I kind of point back to as well is, and I talk about this through 2 chapters in the book in full. This is a major section because I think it's very important for us about where we are right now in our country and in our system. It is the destabilization of Antifa and the National Socialist Party at the same time that brought down the Weimar Republic. And then after that point, you do see Hitler rise to power in 1934, just 1 year after the founding of Antifa. So the Communist Red Front groups have been fighting, battling it out in the streets. That street violence and the increase of political violence, the justification and the moral framework, which allows for political violence, actually leads to the weakening and destabilization of the state, which of course to an anarchist is partially in line with your philosophy, right? Because you believe the state has no moral authority. The problem is because in that case, the weakening of the state did not then lead to an anarchist workers' paradise or libertarian socialism, you sometimes hear it referred to as. It led to bad actors who used extreme political violence being able to take that opportunity and use it for their own political agendas. And that is what we cannot have here in the United States. We need to shut down political violence immediately from its seed, from its very start, from its very nucleus. We cannot cross the Rubicon into political violence, because once we do, it metastasizes, and it has always been this way. It metastasizes further and further until it takes down the entire system, and the bad actors that then exploit that for power take over. And what comes out are some of the darkest moments in all of human history, and we talk about that in the book.
So now we have a limitation, and you just kind of gave a demonstration of it. Is if I want to explain to my neighbor what you just said, it requires that 5 minutes of intense dialogue.
No, not even. You say, well, look, it's a book about political violence.
Allow me to continue.
About political violence.
So the way memory works is memory is encoded and then it's filed. So I've got to take everything you just said, and now I've got to encode it, file it properly so it can be retrieved later on. So I can kind of, see examples of it and bring them to mind when I see fires and when I see everything. So there's 2 issues. Number one is if I want to explain to my neighbor what Antifa is, your book is probably one of the only ways to do that, because I looked everywhere. All the academic papers, and I told you this offline and online, right? I said all the academic papers that you see also give this type of Homeric quality, right, to Antifa, and the ones that are critical of it give a virtuousness to it, but they say they go too far. And other academic papers will have all these citations to all the radicals like Mark Bray, and then they will also say in this era of Trump. Have you noticed that? They always say but they don't even say Trump. They say in this era, like it's a time period that Trump is just kind of a.
Well, this is something we talk about as well, where media framing and gaslighting narratives are being able to be employed. And this started all the way back. The gaslight frame starts in 2015, where Antifa would begin attacking Trump rallies, and CNN would go on, and the headline would be "Violence breaks out among Trump supporters," right? But they never explained it. No, the Trump supporters are the victim, and that the aggressor are this group called Antifa. The country writ large doesn't hear of Antifa until much later, August 17th, 2017, with Charlottesville. That's the first time they hear of Antifa. But actually, they've been around since, at least in the current iteration, from 2015, attacking Trump rallies. But the media always used the gaslight frame to keep Antifa just off the stage, right? You see violence, you see people getting bloody, you see punches being thrown, but you're never told who the initial aggressors are in these instances.
So we're going to go through a bunch of really quick comments and observations, because I also asked people, and we're running over time, but I also asked people how they would describe it. So I want to get your feedback, kind of like a speed round. Can you do that? Just like a speed round on what their comments about Antifa is. So Bobby Loop, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And that's a beautiful picture. You see that picture that they've got in their profile?
I actually really like that picture. That's a cool picture.
It is.
Father's Day's coming up. That's what makes me think of that.
It's a beautiful picture. And so Bobby Loop, again, thank you so much for joining us, says, how do I explain that a group named Anti-Fascist is actually a, get this, fascist?
Well, I wouldn't fall into that trap at all. I'd say anti-fascist is a code word for communist front group. They are communist, and the word anti-fascist comes from Weimar Germany, and it also became the state religion of East Germany. So anti-fascist is a code word for communist.
And there was another really interesting question here. And there was another okay. So there was this one. And I want to take out a little bit of the inflammatory, because I don't really like the KKK.
Right. Yeah.
So let's strip out the inflammatory, but we can look at the racial elements of it, because there is, right? We've discussed this. So Psycho Steva says Antifa is just, I'm going to say KKK, but that doesn't mean I'm in agreement with it. I'm just repeating their question. Antifa is just the KKK with black hoodies instead of white hoods and robes. So there's a element to it that is that kind of creeps, like kind of interloper into black issues, right? Into issues of kind of the historical suffering of black people, right? And
well, I mean, there's a couple ways you can look at that. Certainly from the most direct answer would be, yes, these are both groups that employed political violence to achieve their ends or to support their ends. Ones that started at a small level and then eventually became very brutal and very horrific for their targets. So again, this is an example of what I'm talking about, that political violence, once used, is very hard to contain. It's very hard to put Pandora's demons back in the box, and that we should never allow this to be part of American culture. Now, when you want to get back to the next section of it, it actually does stand to reason that when we were talking about Joy Reid recently said on MSNBC that Antifa doesn't exist and that they don't go anywhere, they don't do anything. And I said, my goodness, we finally found one white extremist group that Joy Reid doesn't seem to want to talk about, because by and large, Antifa is a phenomenon that affects white upper class youth, age range 20 to 35 or so. You do get some older ones, but by and large, I'd say 99, 97%. This is a very, very Caucasian American and throughout North America and Western Europe phenomenon. This is not something you do not see a lot of minority members that are joining Antifa.
Okay, so we're gonna keep going on, kind of a speed round now, because I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And this is a very important video kind of we're doing right now, because the only way we can win against Antifa is if we can have the conversation with our neighbors. So really what we're talking about here is we already know what Antifa is. Now we need the language to be able to explain it to our neighbors. Does that make sense to everybody? So Gold Rose, thank you so much for joining us. Says, my copy of the book arrived last night, digging in.
Thank you so much, Gold Rose. I appreciate you.
You're awesome, Gold Rose. And you're going to be the closing comment if you can actually tell us what you think of the book so far. We're going to close up with that. I'm very interested. I'm genuinely interested. So
my first live review.
Isn't that awesome?
It is pretty cool.
Because everybody's
terrifying in a sense. No, I'm excited.
No. Everybody's got the same problem right now. Everybody wants to talk to their neighbor about it, but we're now, in order to explain to our neighbor,
we don't have national borders or state borders. We have information borders, right? We have information borders that separate us. That's what's dividing Americans today. It's informational borders. So my information silo in my house versus someone's information silo next door, it could be completely separate. It's almost like we're living on two different planets, even though we live on the same street.
You know, the best way I've ever heard of it is the way Scott Adams talks about two screens. You ever think about that?
One movie, two screens.
It's amazing because it's actually very elegant. It's very economical to think about it that way. It's really incredible. So we're going to keep going on. Metalman, I want to thank you so much for joining us. It says, Hope Rides Alone, not good enough. You need to put a picture in there. Everybody loves a picture. Just throw a flower in there or something, please. Metalman, thank you so much for joining us. Says Antifa is a straw man created by collectivists to give collectivism a common enemy, the individual.
Well, that's an interesting statement because Antifa, you know, I assume the person who's writing this is coming to it, given the rhetoric, is coming to this from more of a libertarian perspective. But Antifa are collectivists; they are not individualists. So I don't know that they would have been created as a straw man because they generally, by and large, given that they adhere to anarcho-communism, they by and large are collectivists. They're not individualists at all.
You know who you should have a chat with? I'm going to host it. I'm going to host you and Paul Godfrey. Do you know who Paul Godfrey is?
I do, I believe. And the last time I checked, I believe he might actually be working on an Antifa book.
His is much different because
his is more academic.
Yeah, his is extremely academic because it focuses on the 1940s, right? And you discuss that, and then you kind of quantum leap to now and to talk about.
I mean, mine's more of a field report, and hey, this is what the guys believe. This was the history, and this is what's going on now. This is how they're funded, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas with Paul, it seems like he's really getting into tracking the deep philosophy of these ideas, where they come from, and how they've metastasized into the force they are in our culture today.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm going to actually host something. I'm going to actually text him, but we'll do a quick one. I want to keep it like 30 minutes because I like these, and he's brilliant. I love Paul. So Maddie Tolliver, thank you so much for joining us, and I like that picture, right? Says, and this is very interesting, as at least a second-generation American, I will say history matters. Nice. So from what the discussions you've had so far, you find that the people who are most aware of Antifa are people who come out of immigrant backgrounds because they have more proximity in their lineage to organized violence of that type.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's something that, again, you know, having family in Poland that lived under communism, having a wife who's from the Soviet Union. I mean, they look at this stuff and they're like, I've seen this before. I've heard this before. You know, the people saying it might be slightly different, but I've heard all these empty promises. I know where this leads, and it does not lead to happiness and prosperity and rainbows and unicorns for everybody.
Okay, we're going to keep going because we're going to do a speed round. We're going to get even quicker now. So, Depth of Souls, and you actually infiltrated Antifa, and so this is a very quick question, very simple question. They're mostly white people who look drugged out, methed out. I don't even want to say the last part because your book does not emphasize a political party, right? You're very good at kind of stripping that out. So Depth of Souls, thank you so much for joining us, says, and they're mostly white people who look drugged out, methed out. Why is it that the mug shots that Andy No will post are basically all white people who look peculiar and they have an appearance of somebody that we would associate with being a drug user?
Well, I can certainly say from my observations when I was in Chaz, the time I spent there, both the daytime and the nighttime, that drugs were absolutely prevalent. That was certainly people who embraced drug culture, meth, absolutely, marijuana, absolutely, to as much as cocaine. We didn't see heroin necessarily, but what was going on in those tents, the tent city in Chaz, was certainly set up for quite a time. And even by the way, the tent city was actually the one part of Chaz that was allowed to continue beyond the sort of formal takedown of the Chaz and the reinstitution of the police precinct there in Seattle, in Capitol Hill. But it was a homeless drug user who later on, a couple weeks after the takedown of Chaz, who was still being allowed, they were allowed to stay in these tents. He is someone that I actually met at one point because he was sort of ubiquitous running around Chaz, and I got video of him sort of stomping around in the community farm that they were trying to build. He then goes and the story's up in Seattle Times, and anyone can read it. The same guy then murders his girlfriend, sort of his camp wife, and with a hammer and nails one night after they've done drugs together. He then goes, and police are chasing him through the park, but locks and barricades himself in a tool shed in the Chaz. This whole story is in the book. That's in the park, this tool shed in Cal Anderson Park. Police are trying to get in. They can't get in. They don't want to bust in because they're worried he's going to do something. They finally wait until the early hours of the morning. They bust open the door and they find him face down in a vat of bleach there. He's essentially committed suicide as the police were going to come after him. So he's committed suicide in a vat of bleach there in the tool shed. And so I still go back and watch the videos of him and think, just why did we all let this happen? Why did we all just sit back and watch and let this happen?
We're going to keep going on. So Steve Petty, and thank you so much for joining us. Let me see what that picture is, right? And it's a nice picture, right? Nice picture. And then we've got one or two more questions and we're going to go. So Jack, it's like Family Feud, like that, right? So Steve Petty, this never would have been tolerated in my childhood by either party. When you think about, and in your discussions and in your kind of research and your infiltration as well into Antifa, what is it when you speak with them and when you're exposed to them, because you're part of the kind of that culture and its antagonistic.
Well, and when you go into the groups, you have to kind of be able to speak their language, meet them where they are, know their energy, know their mannerisms to be able to blend in. If not, you get caught very quickly. They're always very quick to challenge people that they don't recognize. So you better be able to talk the talk, and you better be able to fit in, and you better have some kind of a basic cover story set up as to who you are, where you're from. For me, I usually talk about Philadelphia. I say, I'm from Philly. I'm just out here visiting, etc. Because I'm from Philly, so I know everything about the city. If somebody asks me a question or tries to challenge me, I can give them a correct answer. You really do need to be able to talk to that. But as far as Steve's question here, this wouldn't have been tolerated. Look, the United States of the past is where it is. It's in the past, right? We have to deal with things as they are now, and our institutions have become weak. They've become soft. Our people, through a variety of means, have become more exposed to social media viral videos that have been manipulated, that are cut and edited and doctored in a way to portray law enforcement in a negative light, and so that it creases the anti-law enforcement aspect. And then and you just look at example, by the way, this massive controversy, the way that Republicans and Democrats are both trying to distance themselves from crackdowns on this group. And it's something where I even look at, and I'd be critical of the Trump administration for this as well, the way that they were so quick to say, no, we didn't order tear gas. We didn't want tear gas for Lafayette Square. That wasn't us. You can't pin that on us. That wasn't. They were burning down a church. They were refusing to leave. They were barricading parts of a park, a historic park, mind you, that is directly adjacent to the White House.
We're going to keep going. But I want to say something.
And yet they were unwilling to even own up to the fact that they used basic crowd control measures to clear the square, which was obviously a security situation.
Can I tell you what the problem was? Trump's rhetoric beyond kind of the veneer of populism, which he took a lot of your 2015, 2016 kind of populism stances and definitely Cernovich's, and he definitely built upon that, right? It was always, you could always see kind of a correspondence between what you were saying and thinking, which was, clearly the pulse of the people, and Mike Cernovich, because Mike, I think of, is probably the best. I think of Mike Cernovich as an attitudinal survey of America. Did you know that? He's an attitudinal survey. What he's saying at that moment is really the way America kind of feels. That's the way.
Yeah, and you can definitely see that flow. How many times back when he was on Twitter, would I say something, have a tweet up, and then a couple of days later, you'd see essentially the same thing on the president's account. Yeah.
But ultimately, the tweets are only 280 characters, and Trump failed but Trump really failed. And one of the reasons he failed in his rhetoric, one of the reasons he really failed is because now we're discussing Antifa, and Trump did not have. See, I'm going to sound solicitous. I don't care. Trump didn't have your book, so he also was ill-equipped to be able to have that conversation with people. Does that make sense to you?
He didn't employ the rhetoric that would bring it to a wider audience outside of sort of the direct conservatives, the people who have been the targets of this violence, the targets of their aggression. I get what you're saying. Like you have to use these tools and take these tools in order to look. There's no point in me just going to conservatives and saying, hey, we should do something about Antifa. They're all going to agree with me. That's preaching to the choir. This is a book. And actually, I've had some feedback on the book. They say, Jack, I've known some of this stuff before. We know these guys are bad. Why are you even writing this book? And I said, you guys don't get it. I didn't write it necessarily for conservatives. I wrote it for people that are out there in the middle.
So I'm going to interrupt. I want to get back to the Trump thing. This is a very important point. I'm going to hammer it to everybody. I think about this a lot. I'm keeping a log. You saw a little bit of my log. Trump, when he had that platform, squandered it in many ways. And because now he had a limitation of Jack said this about Antifa, Cernovich said this about Antifa, the people that he found most influential in helping construct his narratives, right? You guys were fantastic at it. But now past the 280 tweets, he had a loss because you can't just say his loss was that he would stop once he said Antifa is burning down buildings. He didn't have the book. You don't understand how important these type of things are. He did not have, what is it, like 280 pages? Is that right? Plus the notes.
I think we hit exactly 300 actually in the latest edit.
Because that's with the notes.
No, because you don't have the final draft.
Yeah, sure. So Trump did not have 300 pages of well-researched content that he could now share with people. He was just as constrained as I am, and a lot of people are, by trying to explain what Antifa is. Does that make sense to you? And what Antifa isn't.
I know I have a. Thought I had a copy of it here.
No, don't worry about it. I want you to listen to what I'm saying because I want to.
No, I can give people a quick preview of something I'm working on, top secret. Totally. That's all you get. Top secret project that I've been working on for a while behind the scenes.
So Trump had the same limitation as I'm trying to express to you and everybody else now. We all realize it. You may not have it. Everybody else does. Trump did not have the language, the elegance. He did not have kind of that background where he could discuss Antifa beyond.
Well, Donald Trump's a force of nature. That's kind of always the way I've looked at his candidacy, his presidency. He's a force of nature. He's a bull in the China shop, right?
But he had the same problem.
And I always enjoyed his bull in a China shop, kind of being unleashed.
But that's a different conversation. That's a different conversation, though.
But it's just for all of his ability to deconstruct, right, and to expose what was going on, where the administration always came up short was in taking steps to achieve a solution to all of these things that they were exposing.
Okay, so now if I'm asking, like I've been asking you throughout this and we've been discussing, how do I explain it to my neighbor? Trump also failed at being able to explain Antifa to your neighbor. And if he had been able to do that successfully, he might have been able to get more actually ground support that would have been more media resistant. And Trump had a lot on his plate, so I'm just looking at this as an example.
Well, I mean, I will say though that there were plenty of videos that Trump retweeted, and when I did the video last year, the documentary of Antifa Rise of the the Rise of the Black Flags that we still actually have up at antifamovie.com. He actually did retweet my trailer for that, my video. So for anybody who was able to go to that platform when he had it, for anyone who was able to be a part of when he was on Twitter and understanding the power of those, I believe it was 80 million followers at one point. He was quite generous. I think he was very generous to this platform.
That's a different thing.
Though I wish, I do wish that the Trump of Twitter and the Trump of the campaign and the Trump of the administration were more on the same page and we're firing all in the same direction. But I will, I've always got to be thankful because he was always very generous to me, always very generous to my.
I'm going to ask you an honest question. We're going to take one thing after that. I'm going to ask you an honest question first, then we're going to take something because you're going to like it, and then we're going to go.
Great.
If Trump had your book, look how crazy I sound, right? Because you won't do it because you can't get over that vulnerability, right? We were discussing this before, right? So if Trump had your book, do you think it would have helped him make a better argument of the dangers of Antifa?
Well, I think it could have. I think it could have been something that, people respond to things differently. And people in Washington, D.C. certainly respond to things differently than people in New York. In New York, it's a business background, you certainly know New York, right? You can say something to somebody and they get exactly what you mean. In Washington, D.C., they say there's no mathematicians in DC. That's everyone who knows how to do math is on Wall Street. Everyone in DC is the wannabe poet because they're wordsmiths. They believe in words. They believe in prose. That's what they're into. So you hand somebody in DC a book, a thick read, a long report like I have with citations, with footnotes, with bibliography, with multiple appendices, full on timelines, right? This is a finished, it's really based on what I used to do in the intelligence community called a finished intelligence product, or FinTel. And for a finished intelligence product, you need to go through all those steps. You have an assessment, you have a source summary, you have works cited, you have all of these things. So in presenting it in that format to people around the horn, in the Beltway, in Washington, D.C., am I saying that everybody would have agreed? No, certainly not. But you definitely would have picked up more people than you would have otherwise because I'm presenting it in a format that they are going to be open and receptive to in the form of this book.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was really awesome. And I know it sounds like I'm on the attack on that side, and I'm really not. I'm just I'm inquisitive, right? And a lot of people are inquisitive. So we're going to go to one last thing, and then we're going to close up on your book review.
This is the third one last thing, if I'm counting correctly.
Nancy, is he counting? You're probably counting correctly. Okay, so here's an interesting question. I've thought about this a lot. So I wanted to respond to this. Is patriots versus communism. So somebody is defining Antifa, kind of the dilemmas of Antifa as patriots versus communism, and the Chris Wray, is that his name? Chris Wray? And now I guess
our erstwhile FBI director.
Yeah. And you've been awesome commenting on him last year. And I remember your periscopes that you used to do about Christopher Wray and how you said we have to get rid of him right now. So Chris Wray and kind of the DC establishment will say that Antifa is just an idea. Can't the same also be said of patriots?
Well, sure. Patriotism is an idea. Believing in your country is just an idea. American values, in a sense, are just ideas. I also, some people will say America is an idea, but I actually I don't prescribe to that. I believe America is a place. America is our home. All right. America is the place where our founders built this country. Our ancestors came to live, to create a new life. I know 3 generations back when my Polish ancestors came over, they wanted to found a new life for their family. And I come from a long line of, farmers and soldiers pretty much all the way back in rural Poland. And, I'm very grateful for everything that my family members did for me and to create those risks and to build up the situation to put me in a position to be successful. And so when I think of the fact when they say Antifa is an idea, what I always push back and say is, well, sure, radical Islam is just an idea, but it's an idea that sparks a movement, that creates networks, that forms sleeper cells, that goes and conducts extreme acts. extreme acts of violence, extreme acts of terrorism, or what they would call direct action. So yes, they're an extremist ideology, the same type of extremist ideology that the DOJ under Bishop Garrison, the DOD under Bishop Garrison, the DOD under Lloyd Austin says that they're going after, what Merrick Garland says he wants to go after. This is just as much of an extremist ideology. And I would put up my timeline of the attacks and the actions of Antifa and the riots of 2020 against any type of data they want to throw our way.
Okay, so we're going to do a really quick question, then we're going to go. All right, because we've gone over time. So it's a very quick question. It's Family Feud. You got to buzz in. Okay, so General Khan 1, thank you so much for joining us. Jack, projecting forward, will we see a Spanish-like civil war in the United States with communists, socialists versus capitalists?
No, I don't necessarily think that we will, because we don't have critical mass on either side for that to happen. The closest cognate you see to the Spanish Civil War right now is what's going on in Rojava in northeast Syria, where you see, so the Spanish Civil War, communists and socialists from around the world traveled to Spain to fight on behalf of the communists who were trying to overthrow Spain, right? Obviously, they eventually failed. This was 1936, and it's largely overlooked in a lot of the histories, because in 1939 to start, when Germany and Russia decided to invade my ancestral country of Poland and divide it, that started World War II. That sparked World War II. However, in the Spanish Civil War, you have this huge critical mass, this influx of communists and communist fighters traveling from around the world in to get in that fight, because they've achieved a critical mass in terms of their civil war. I don't think America is anywhere near close to that. However, I do believe that we are going to see light footprint, 5th generation warfare. But keep in mind that that's an entire 2 generations of warfare ago. That's 3rd generation warfare. That's the 1930s. We are beyond that. We're so far beyond that in terms of our generational warfare. And so you need to understand 4th generation warfare theory with Michael Lind. You need to read 5th generation warfare theory with John Robb. We touch on 5th generation warfare in this. That is open source movements, open source insurgencies, open source terrorism. That's what Antifa exists as. That's what they exist as today, where they don't need to engage in full-on hostilities to achieve their victories. Because again, remember, their victory is subversion of the system. And in many ways, of course, they've also been co-opted by the elites. So what they're actually trying to do now is, as I said, all the way back at the beginning, when I said, how do you de-radicalize an Antifa? I'd say, why are you on the same group? Why are you on the same side? Let me take that over. If you're trying to de-radicalize an Antifa, I'd say, why are you on the same side as Citigroup? Why are you on the same side as Bank of America? I thought you guys were Occupy Wall Street, Zuccotti Park. What happened to the 99% versus the 1%? All of a sudden, you're on the same side as all of those exploitative Wall Street groups like BlackRock that's in bed with the CCP, that's trying to usurp the generational wealth of the millennials to turn them into a renter class who are going to be paying, who are absolutely going to be paying the pockets, lining the pockets of the mega rich. You're going to be on their side rather than on the side of the people that are getting screwed over. I'd say you need to check yourself. You need to check where you stand. You need to check where you're on these issues, and check the actual people that are becoming victims of the policies you say you oppose.
And we're going to close with that, Jack. So I want to, before we close, I'm going to show you some funny comments. You want to see some funny comments?
Antifabook.com. And if you want the best night's sleep in the whole wide world, and you want to be able to do interviews 12, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 24 hours a day like Jack Posobiec does, you need to sleep on a wonderful, beautiful pillow with a patented fill. It's the My Pillow by Mike Lindell. Go to mypillow.com and use promo code POSO for up to 60% off on My Pillow and other accommodating products.
So I'm going to show you 2 last things, and we're going to go. We're going to look at your book review, Rising Serpent. This is funny.
Busted.
Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny? And then
call the show one last thing. Yeah, seriously.
And we're going to close up with your book review. You want to hear this? It's pretty awesome, right?
Yeah, that's like Thomas Aquinas has a theory of the concept of man's last end, and that man's last end cannot be reached in this life. A man's last end is our goal of our journey in the eternal, in the afterlife, right? So man's last end does not exist in this life, and so it is unreachable, right? And so that's kind of like the end of this podcast is unreachable.
Here's your book review. Gold Rose. Thank you so much.
He's into it. Boom.
Says, I just finished the introduction. It's enthralling. I have to read more. We're going to close on that. Awesome, right?
That's why I made the introduction so good. The introduction is, and I'm going to say this. I know I don't usually talk this way on Twitter. The introduction is our sexiest chapter right up front, because that, boom, so much spice, so much sizzle right there in the intro. You say, I got to read the rest of this book.
It is good. So in closing up, you're going to be with Alex Marlowe. Is that what I understood? You're going to be doing, where are you going to be doing some more discussions and interviews about?
I am. I've got to look up. We're in discussions possibly Monday. I forget exactly. I forget exactly when I'm doing the show, but yeah, I'm doing Alex pretty soon. He's a great guy. And I have his book actually sitting next to me on the desk right here. It's under a couple others, so I can't grab it right now, but Breaking the News, incredible book that he just put out. But we're going to be doing an interview about my new book.
You are awesome. I'm going to press end broadcast. You're going to stay here for one more minute. Everybody else is going to go. This was fun, right? We talked about a lot of stuff.
Hey, we're selling books, man. I'm doing my job.
You're doing
ABC,
more than
baby.
It's more than selling books. You've got to forget about that part. That's one part of it, because then you it's that emotional thing you and I were discussing, that you're selling a piece.
Look, I would not be able to put this much time and effort and travel. And we just got in from Nashville last night, and I hit the ground running. I would not be able to put this much time, effort, and passion into it if I didn't believe in what I was doing. I really wouldn't.
You're helping people inform others of.
People need to get this book, read it, and then share it. I don't even care if you go and buy another copy. Give them your copy. Read this book and then pass it on to somebody else. Be the other underground. Be the response to the mainstream media gaslighting. Be the people who walk towards the fire and aren't afraid to talk to their neighbors about what they see going on in this country. Throw it up on Nextdoor. Be brave. Be courageous. Be the person who's outspoken. Be the change.
We're going to go, Jack. I'm going to press end broadcast. You're going to stay for one more minute. Everybody else is going to go. So I want to thank everybody so much for joining Jack and I on this. And I also particularly want to thank Election Wizard. So electionwiz.com. They were awesome. They asked such an important question that I was like,
put us on the spot, put us on the spot.
It's awesome. It was a good question, right? So I want to thank everybody so much. I'm going to press the button. Jack, you're going to stay here. Thank you, everybody, for allowing Jack and I on your feed.
Thank you.
Bye.